Hey, welcome to the One Piece at a Time Distilling Institute with your host, the alchemist of Indiana's Black Forest, Alan Bishop. Hey, this channel is all about home distilling and legal distilling. If you've got questions, reach out to us in the comments below, social media, or via bishopshomegrown@gmail.com. And don't forget to check out thealchemistcabinet.com. Hey guys, back in the tiny bedroom studio again. Answering your questions for the One Piece at a Time Distilling Institute. As always, reach out to me, alchemistcabinet.com, social media, etc. You know the rules, bishopshomegrown@gmail.com. So I'm going to try to blast through 2 or 3 questions in this particular video. So this one is from Jamie Goins. Hey Alan, love the channel and thank you for sharing your knowledge. I've learned a lot. My question is, why does it still huff and puff? It happens when running hard and fast stripping runs. I've heard it's because the condenser water is too cold, but I've tested this theory and it still happens. I have to run my flat top Chinese pot extremely slowly or it does this. My keg only does this while stripping. Could this cause any kind of smearing or other issues? I just can't wrap my mind around the physics of it. I deal with the transfer of thermal energy at work, but I'm stumped on this one. Thanks. So a couple of things can cause that. So I don't know what size worm you're using for either the Chinese pot and or for the keg that you're using. The cold shouldn't have anything to do with it. Now the cold will imbue that spirit the colder you run with more of those volatiles that you might want to off gas. Those Chinese pots are notorious for having too small of a condenser on them, and what happens with them that causes them to kind of huff and puff is basically because what you have is a vapor buildup with a very small outlet on the still, and so it builds up and it kind of burps as it goes. Putting a larger size worm on there and a larger size outlet on that still will help that tremendously and give you a proper obtention temperature or closer to proper, which is 68 to 70 degrees Fahrenheit for the actual liquid that you're gathering off of the still. I'm going to presume that the same thing is going on with your keg still on the stripping runs. Maybe your condenser is too small, but it could be a number of other things. So a lot of larger size modern stills, especially in commercial distilleries, I've talked about this on the channel before, actually have an air vent to vent off any gases that build up during the distillation process, either as a result of fermentation not being completely finished or CO2 being driven off, or the more volatile elements that you don't want to imbue the spirit with. Worms can do the same thing as long as they're of the proper size, right, to be able to work for the size vessel that you are dealing with. But the other thing that can cause this with a pot still in particular, and I see this on antique style onion alembics that are run off a fire quite often, say at Mount Vernon or Locust Grove, and I suspect we'll have the same problem at Daisy Spring Mill. If you run those pots too hard, that can also cause them to pulsate, right? So you don't want a drip, 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 like some people say that that's what you want. You don't. You also don't want it running super, super hard, right? Because then you're going to get that pulsation, which you want a nice, steady, matchstick size stream that will actually arc away from the worm just a little bit during the distillation process, essentially. So there's a number of things that could cause what you're talking about, and hopefully one of those things that I just mentioned will help you solve the issue that you have. As far as it affecting your cuts, yes, absolutely. On a doubling run, that will affect your cuts. I don't know if you're making any cuts on your stripping run. Myself on double pot still mode, I don't make cuts on my stripping run whatsoever. I do it all on my spirit run, my doubling run, my finishing run, whatever you want to call it. But if you're trying to make cuts with that thing pulsating, yeah, it can definitely cause some smearing, especially because you're running smaller size stills, right? I mean, a 15 is not a very big size still, and that Chinese pot is presumably smaller than that, is my guess. So I would definitely try to address that issue and get it fixed if you possibly can. And if any of those fixes work for you, it's something to consider without a doubt. So moving on through the pile of questions here, and I'm going to try to get 3 of them in this video if I can and work my way through it. So this one is actually from the One Piece at a Time Distilling Institute channel on YouTube from Jim Fryer. Okay, newbie question coming in hot. When running a reflux device, deflag, plates, etc., does it slow down the distillation process? Say you run a pot still on a 10-gallon mash and it takes, say, 8 hours. Does running a couple of plates or deflag up your runtime to, say, 11 hours? Did I word that so that the question is understood? Thanks. Yes, you absolutely worded that question perfect. I know exactly what you're talking about. First, let me address this. A 10-gallon pot still shouldn't take 8 hours to distill. 4 to 5 hours should be sufficient time to run through 10 gallons pretty easily, right? I know that's not your question, but I just kind of want to address that because even on whether it's a stripping run or a doubling run can run a little longer, right? Because you have more alcohol there to actually blast through and separate into the various fractions that you want. I do find that a lot of people do run their pots too slow, and they get worried that it's a quality thing. Well, I hear you just running on slow drip or slow and cold, etc. If you guys watch the video, you'll see that that's not necessarily the case, and that has not ever historically been the case with pot still distillation. As far as a reflux and or plates slowing down your distillation, you are absolutely correct, and there's a couple of reasons for that. One is because you are obviously holding some of that vapor back from getting to the condenser. As such, you're going to add time because you're dropping some of that vapor back down into the pot as liquid, or making a buffer zone on a plate where you're building up to push vapor alcohol through liquid alcohol, get that exchange, and drop the heavier components back down into the pot for redistillation. That is going to slow everything down as a process in general. You also don't want to run fast with a deflag or with a plate, because you will blow that vapor right through that deflag and right past that plate and not get an efficient reflux capability. The other thing is you want to be running a little slower anyways if you're doing that, because I'm going to presume you're either doing a single pass or you might be doing a double pass trying to get to high proof. You got to pay real close attention to your cuts, because you have now compressed your heads into a smaller fraction, right? I don't do that typically. If I'm running deflag or a plate, I will actually blast the heads off and just collect the full volume of those heads. I'm not worried about the little bit of alcohol that's in there that I'm going to lose. I want those heads out so I'm not smearing things, right? I want a very clean base alcohol when I'm running reflux or a deflag or a plate or anything of that nature. So you want to slow down yourself in general so you can analyze those cuts a little closer, collect in smaller volumes, really do the sensory analysis that you need to do. And I'll give you an example. So at my distillery, I've got a 350 gallon copper alembic doubling still. When we went to make vodka the first few times from corn, that still, which normally runs for about 6 hours roughly, to make our normal doubling run. Once I started refluxing that with the deflamator, as well as the 8-plate whiskey column and the 12-plate vodka column run in conjunction, because I can get to 192.3 roughly on that still, we went from a 6-hour distillation to a 17-hour distillation. So yes, you are adding time and drag to that still, absolutely. But to make a quality spirit, you're going to have to do that. So hopefully that answered your question. I'm going to go ahead and blast through one more time and see if I can't find another question I can answer here real quick. So recently through my, okay, so this is, I don't even know how to say that name. It doesn't matter. It's okay. They'll know who they are. So recently through my own experience, I found that char can affect the direction that the spirit takes. Would you be able to talk about how char affects the flavor of spirits? And thank you. Absolutely. I can comment on this. So I've talked about on the channel in the past a few times about what the barrel really does and about maturation. And one thing that I am very, very confident of is that char has always basically been used in the barrel as a filtration device. It's not the char itself that's actually providing flavor to the spirit. It is the toast underneath that char, the toast layer, where you get those caramelized sugars, that you get those vanillin flavors, those caramel flavors, etc. that bourbon, for example, is so popular for, right? The char is there as a filtration device, basically to pull out anything that you may or may not want as that barrel heats up, cools down, etc. That stuff gets trapped in the char. This is what some big distilleries nowadays call the devil's cut, which we used to call really cheap rot gut whiskey when people used to give away barrels here in southern Indiana and out in bourbon country in Kentucky. They used to give barrels away. People get them, put a couple gallons of water in them, and sweat the barrels to pull the whiskey back out of that wood. That whiskey that's in that wood is not the whiskey you want to be drinking, guys, because it is full of acetaldehyde, ethyl acetate components, and things of that nature that you're trying to get rid of. That's what the char is there for. Now, at my distillery, we use number 2 char because we also use a medium plus toast head, and we want medium plus toast underneath that char level. We are after specifically that toasted barrel wood that's underneath the char. I only use a 2 char because I use a pot still. If I were using a column still, a low-rec industrial column still, where you're flash distilling everything and you don't make actual heads, hearts, and tails cuts, but you run the condenser a little hot to get rid of more of the heads, I run a 3 or a 4 char because I would need a heavier char level in order to pull out those impurities that I do not want in my whiskey. But since I'm running pot still, I can make a very specific heads cut and a very specific tails cut. I don't need that heavy char, right? I just need enough to work as a slight filtration device for my whiskey. So again, bear in mind that on pot stills, you have that ability to be selective about the alcohols that you want to keep, right? And so therefore, it's really that toast that you're more after, more so than the char a lot of times. So Anyways, guys, reach out to me with your questions, bishopshomegrown@gmail.com, social media. Sometimes I do miss your questions on Facebook because I get bumped over to my bulk folder. If you're not one of my friends on social media, I apologize for that. Sometimes it takes me a couple weeks to remember to look in there and find them, but I will eventually get to your question if I possibly can, or I don't lose the paper somewhere, or whatever happens. You know, goofy shit happens in life. So I've got a cataract surgery coming up here shortly. I don't have a date on it yet. Yes, I'm only 39 and I have cataracts. I know I'm as excited about it as you are, trust me. So if I seem a little off lately, I do apologize for that, but we're going to get that taken care of and keep this channel rolling, guys. All right, love y'all. Have a good one.